Next up to our virtual stage, I'd like to welcome Kyoung Lim, Senior Director of Supply Chain Management at Samsung Biologics. Over to you, Kyoung.
Thank you, Lisa, for the introduction. And also, that was a great presentation by Caroline earlier. I'm going to take over here on and talk about supply chain management under COVID-19 and beyond, some of the consideration that we need to have. So very high level, I'm going to talk about overall pharmaceutical market and followed by supply chain management under COVID that we're currently managing and some of the key challenges that is exposed by the COVID situation. I'm going to wrap up with some future consideration for supply chain agility. Current pharmaceutical market, overall, last decade, pharmaceutical biotech product sales is continued to grow. What we have seen in recent years is in 2018, biotech product sales overtake conventional product sales in the top 100 product sales for the first time. And we believe that's going to continue to grow. Its growth rate compared to conventional medicine is quite significant, while the conventional medicine, their growth rate is continued to decline. And also manufacturing demand for biologics outpaces the capacity expansion. And that is one of the key challenges that we have discovered during the COVID situation as well. Some of the key driving factors for increasing demand for biotech products. First is the continued development of a blockbuster pharmaceutical drug, and also expansion of the outsourcing strategy to prevent a massive capital investment. Lastly, demand for multi-sourcing to secure supply stability in case of unexpected events. In terms of manufacturing capacity increase, that has been primarily, we have seen that in the CDMO companies like ourselves and other CDMO companies in recent years compared to pharmaceutical company. The outbreak of COVID-19 definitely had some significant unanticipated demand in such a very short period of time. This is not something that we have expected, obviously, and while we have seen some growth in the market, year-over-year growth, this has definitely had some significant demand, unforecasted demand in the industry in general, in the players in the industry. And also utilization rate of CDMO company, we believe that's going to continue to increase for ongoing demand and supply balancing and risk management perspective. So impact of COVID, what I have listed here is that, as I mentioned earlier, the number of drugs in the development continued to grow and the market continued to grow, and sheer number of treatments and vaccine related to COVID that's currently ongoing. That is a very, very significant number that we see in such a short period of time. As I mentioned earlier, this is a completely unforecast demand. While supply chain professional globally in the market, we always look for any unexpected situation. But this is definitely not just a supply chain, but our daily lives as well. This has put some significant pressure, especially in supply chain. With that, a COVID that presents some significant challenge in the supply chain. This crisis is not like any other and no other crisis that we have experienced. And I've been in the industry for about almost 20 years now. I've gone through many different challenges that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, but this is not something that we have experienced at all. Personally, myself, I have not seen anything like this. So, what we have done early on, we have actually developed our risk mitigation strategy very early on, and mainly in 3 stages. So, before doing that, what we have done is we have looked at our existing supply chain risk management that we had in place. We look at that on every 2-year cycle to make sure all the risks that we have identified and the risk mitigation plans that we have put in place is that adequate, and do we need to make any modification. Obviously, we have not considered COVID as one of the key risks in the supply chain. So we had to quickly develop our immediate and short and long-term mitigation plan to respond to this COVID situation. So the first and early outbreak in January, February this year, what we have done is, because it initiated in China, we had looked at some of the key raw material that is currently sourced from China, and we have developed the alternate supply strategy, and we have executed as part of our mitigation plan. So we were able to redirect some of the sources outside of, instead of China, we redirected to elsewhere. And what we have done is early pandemic, March, April timeframe, that's when we have experienced significant challenges in our logistics, when all the air traffic has pretty much grounded globally to contain this outbreak in US and Europe and globally. So we had to quickly look at our day-to-day logistics management, air traffic, and cargo management globally. And so we had daily monitoring program of logistics change and alternative route development. So we have successfully managed that. At the same time, we also secured supply for production campaigns that we had ongoing. I'm sure these things that every supply chain professional has had to look at immediately, looking at, do we have enough raw material? Do we have cargoes coming from different parts of the world? Is that arriving on time? Or is that, is there any inland transportation is going okay? So these things, we quickly develop a plan and put in place. In addition, we also developed a supplier hotline with our critical partners. And also we quickly looked at demand and supply plan alignment to make sure that we have ongoing supply to our production. So after we gone through some initial pandemic, some of the crisis management, and we also developed more of a long-term mitigation plans that we have implemented since May and on. And I believe this is going to continue to be a focus of our supply chain going forward, because I don't think COVID situation is going to ease up anytime soon. So we are focusing on alternative supplier sourcing for some of the critical raw material where we don't have that established. And also single source is obviously one of the biggest challenge for supply chain to manage under crisis such as this. And also we are looking at long term, not just next 12 months, but we're looking at beyond 2021 and 2022, how we are going to balance our demand and supply based on the current situation. So we're not, as a contract manufacturing, a development manufacturing company, we have to respond very quickly on client demand, especially a lot of COVID treatments currently underway. So we need to respond to that. At the same time, we expect our raw material supplier to work with us to respond in a timely manner. So we need to start looking at how to plan for not just for this year, but next couple of years in terms of demand supply situation, how they're positioned in terms of their overall production capacity and supply, so that we are synchronous in a way that we can manage the global demand that is required for COVID treatment, and also the further new drug development that we're going to support going forward. And lastly, this is a very important part of it that we have been continued to do so even before COVID, is the continuous management dialogue and communication with our key partner. Under COVID, this become a very important part of our day-to-day activity. In addition to hotline that we have established, we have a routine ongoing review and management of operation and plan sharing with our key partner, so that they can prepare for what's coming in their way. So, while we're focusing on immediate mitigation plan for supply disruption that COVID has put upon us, what made us think is that, there are some challenges that has exposed. First, I'm going to talk about the critical material, a single source. So obviously, we're global, supply chain. This is a global supply chain. We work globally, and, anywhere in the world you can reach within 24 hours. That is, pretty much our day-to-day life that we have been, exposed to up until COVID. As soon as the COVID hit, all the countries blocking their borders and planes stopping, nothing's going anywhere for a period of time. So when you have a single source, a single manufacturing site as for your key critical raw material, that is one of the key elements and that could stop your entire production. So, where do we have single source? Are there any critical raw material? It's not just as a CDMO, but as a pharmaceutical company as well, that you have some of the critical raw materials are a single source that is in the filing that you cannot easily change. So when you are in a situation where entire logistics is halted, that can't move things around, you can actually do so much with their safety stock. And I'm going to talk about the safety stock later on, but it is very important to have mitigation plan. You need to have more than one source on your critical raw material. But we still, to date, in some of the critical pharmaceutical drug, and when we look at raw material going in there, there are a lot of critical raw materials still single source. Second, I think I mentioned when land, sky, and oceans are closed. So we literally saw in front of our eyes our supply chain crippled. We could not get any material because all the planes are grounded, and ocean freight has been redirected. Although it had reached at the port, they could not unload the material. They could not, people could not go there to unload cargo. In some cases in Europe, the trucking, which is very, very, it's major transportation tool, options that's being used in Europe. The truck drivers and at each border control, they're checking for any of the signs of COVID. So finding the driver to go, to move the cargo at some point in time, it was very challenging. Last is, I think for many, many years as a supply chain professional, and we look at global supply chain cost optimization. So, instead, and I mentioned earlier, safety stock strategy, we look at what is optimal safety stock, what is optimal inventory level in terms of cost optimization perspective. Instead of carrying too much inventory because you need to minimize or optimize your overall supply chain costs, you have just enough to carry you over on a day-to-day operation. So it makes sense in terms of a cost optimization, but the risk you're taking in the cases like this is going to be the cost of it. It's going to be significant. So the raw material, some of the inventory cost, and compared to risk and not having those material, and that would impact your production and your overall financial, and ultimately for your the patients you're serving, the risk of that is very, very high compared to overall cost that you're trying to optimize or reduce. So those are some of the key things that we identified as the key challenges that was exposed during this COVID situation. We need to look at that going forward in the future, how to actually respond to each one of them. So I'm gonna, next few slides, I'm gonna talk about some of the areas that you could consider if you haven't already done so in developing your supply chain strategy going forward. The first one is your supply chain risk management process. As I mentioned earlier, we had existing supply chain risk items that we are managing every 2 years for review. So if you don't have already, I would strongly recommend evaluating your supply chain risk. So risk identification, you would list out all the potential or existing supply chain risk and a potential supply chain risk that you can identify now. You would register those in your supply risk registration. So that's based on either historical data or categorization of both internal and external risks that you could identify. So once you identify those risks, you would do proper risk rating. So you rate those risks based on obviously frequency and impact when it happened, and how, whether it's a minor impact or significant impact, and you would rate them in a more objective manner. You will categorize them in a way or so and prioritize based on that, based on your impact risk rating. Once you do that, you would identify mitigation plan and supply chain. Oh, I would like to say that supply chain management could be almighty, but we can't really do that on our own. So in terms of mitigating your supply chain, it's gonna encompass all the relevant stakeholders within your company. So you have to have cross-functional team to develop this mitigation plan. Obviously, primarily, this will be led by supply chain, but you need to make sure you have your quality management counterpart, technical and quality control, if that's a separate part of the quality management. So you have a multifunctional, cross-functional team to develop your risk mitigation plan. Once it is developed, what you need to do is obviously to act on it, making sure these mitigation plans are developed in a way that is a short-term immediate action plan, or so and some more long-term mitigation action plan, because some of them you cannot mitigate that immediately. You need to actually develop a strategy to mitigate them, because it may involve some of the process change, IT technology implementation, some of the system change. So those things are going to take some time. So you need to identify proper leader for each one of the action, and those need to be monitored. And I said earlier, the supply chain needs to lead these risk mitigation activity management, because there are some mitigation plans are led by other team. It needs to be properly managed. So you need to also manage these action monitor them on an ongoing basis to make sure I stay on top of timelines, so that these risks are mitigated, so that you can overall risks are lowered as a result of it. And I said earlier, we manage this on a every 2-year cycle to see if there are any new risks are identified, or some of the mitigation plans needs to be modified. So you need to continuously improve these plans. So regular review of mitigation plan and action and reprioritization would be required. Next is what we call localization. I think we used that word here in Samsung. This is one of the initiatives Samsung Biologics is taking on. We've been working on this for a couple years. I think with this COVID pandemic, this was pretty obvious that we need to have more strengthened localization plan. And I think for those of you who are in more of you are in the US and Europe, you may not recognize this as a significant point of consideration in terms of the supply chain ability. However, for those of you in Asia Pac or some other regions, because the pharmaceutical, the raw materials are currently very much in manufactured in Europe and US. So we were hit pretty early under COVID compared to other regions in Asia. But at the same time, because of the early outbreak and the border closure and the logistics was grounded in terms of logistics management. So we were hit pretty early and hit hard. So it was very important to actually look at our raw materials, safety stock, and inventory, but at the same time, looking at the sources that we could immediately deploy locally to mitigate these risks. So supply security is, ultimately is what we're looking for in terms of a supply chain professional, but, to do so under this situation was a very challenging. So global sourcing, local supplier development, global security within the country and the region, and the manufacturing and distribution, risk consider supply chain cost optimization. All these things consider what we are focusing on is a localization. So what do I mean by localization? Or am I going to develop Korean companies here in Korea to support our operation. That's definitely one of them. But at the same time, what we're focusing on is bringing in the key partners into Korea and the region to establish their manufacturing capability and distribution capability. So when issues such as COVID happens in the future, I hope it doesn't happen again. This is very challenging for all of us in terms of public health wise, but we cannot say today comfortably that this is not anything significant to this is not going to happen in the future. So it is very important that Caroline earlier mentioned supply chain resiliency, and from that perspective, we need to make sure your supply chain infrastructure network is very strong in the region, in your country, so that when issues like this hit us, we can continuously supply material for operation and ultimately drug to patient. Lastly, this is something that we are, in addition to localization, this is something that we are stressing very hard, supply chain, digital transformation of our supply chain. So this is something that has been talked about, thought about with Pharma Industry 4.0. We're still, we are encouraged or forced to look at how we can integrate our supplier. So one of the things that has to some challenges, key challenges exposed earlier, one of the things that I didn't mention is information visibility. So we have certain demand that we need to fulfill, and in addition to that COVID situation, we need to have that information visible very quickly so that we can adapt to some of the changes and also address some of the challenges that we have discovered within supply chain. But with the current situation, obviously, we're not in a position where we can do that very quickly because we're not integrated with our partners and a client. That means a supplier and client. So in an effort to transform our supply chain from IT perspective, we are looking at how to transferring forecasts to our supplier, not in an email format, but they can have access to our forecast information real time, readily available. In addition to that, visibility of a real time inventory. So not only are planning raw material forecast for next 12 to 18 months, we can also have visibility of our raw material that's slated for us and real time visibility of inventory. Next thing is quality management. So that is very challenging in terms of integrating our quality management. So the quality testing, inspection, all data and documentation management, those things, we definitely need to have quality involved in that transformation. I think Caroline mentioned earlier when within the PCSI, common supplier audit and audit sharing. So that's in a way that what we're trying to, it's not exactly the same. However, what we're trying to do is with our supplier, their quality management, with our quality requirement, all the data and information, and their suppliers information, if we, integrating those information with our platform, that, so that we can have all these information readily available and increase our supply chain agility. We can do so with our clients where needed and where possible. I think this is one of the direction we're taking. We have taken our first step doing so. We actually launched earlier this month our supply chain supplier relationship management platform as a start. So we're going to start integrating our systems and the process with our key partners, and in order to while doing that, we can continue to increase our supply chain agility and also resiliency as well. So those are kind of high level what I'd like to share in terms of the things to consider in the future. To summarize that, you need to look at your supply chain risk management process. If you don't have it, develop one. If you have it, make sure that you review that on an ongoing basis. Second is, in terms of the supply chain infrastructure around you, meaning within your country and the region, is that strong enough? If not, you need to take an effort, develop your plan and strategy and plan to make sure those are strong enough going forward. Your supply chain security is there. Lastly, digital transformation of your supply chain, integrating those key activities and supplier and partners that needs to happen in order to manage those crises going forward more effectively. So that's what I have prepared, and I hope this helped you in a way to develop your supply chain strategy going forward. And with that, I'm gonna take over to, hand over to Elisa.